Well, if you're African, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, you've probably heard before the saying that North Africa is not Africa, because North Africans consider themselves far too light, far too developed, and far too advanced to be associated with Africa. If anything, they always think they're partly European and partly Arab. Growing up, we heard comments that they are racist and they do not like Africans and they don't consider themselves Africans until it suits them, until they're going to the World Cup, until they're doing something internationally and they need the African support, then they're Africans. Even at the World Cup, when everybody was rooting for them, one of the key players came out to say, oh, this is a win for the Arab nations. And Africans are like, excuse me? Excuse me, is when the coach came out to do damage control. And let me tell you, that seed of hate has manifested itself because their president came out to say that the influx of African immigrants in Tunisia is changing the dichotomy of the country, and soon they'll be way too black and not Arab enough, and it has caused a lot of violence towards black people, and African countries are being forced to repatriate their people from North Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're here to discuss what goes on in North Africa and why they think they're better Africans, lighter Africans, and maybe just not Africans. Hi guys, my name is Ndiro Ganga. Welcome again to another edition of our conversations. As I had said, my name is Ndiro Ganga. I'm a business journalist and I'm also a content creator. I create videos on diaspora relocation to the African continent, just sharing real-time stories and experiences of relocating back to the continent, so you can learn a thing or two from each other and also build a community where we can share experiences, network, and grow. If you'd like to watch this kind of content, head over to my YouTube channel at Ndiro Ganga, and you can always connect with me on social media at Ndiro Ganga across all platforms as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Now today I want us to discuss something that has been sitting very heavily on my heart. And you've heard a lot about the Tunisian scandal and what the president said, but today I want to give you an African perspective. I'm Kenyan by birth. I currently live in Ghana, and so I've interacted with many Africans, North Africans to be precise also. I want to also put it out there that prior to this event, I was very considerate, right? Now, growing up, we heard a lot about North Africans do not consider themselves Africans, but as a journalist, when you grow up, you're like, okay, there are always so many sides to a story. I have a friend who's Egyptian, and I said, I'm going to reach out to my friend and ask him, what is this that we heard growing up? What is this that we've heard? And so I asked him, and things about race and color are very sensitive. And I said, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but there is chatter out there that North Africans do not consider themselves Africans. If anything, they think they're Arab and not Africans. And what he said to me sort of put those doubts to bed. He said, when people ask Egyptians if they're Arabs, Egyptians will say they're not Arabs. But also just boxing them and saying they're Africans, yet they do not look like Africans. The skin texture is different, the culture is different, and all that stuff. It didn't feel right, because again, when people want to say that you're African, they want you to be African in a certain type of way. I don't know if you understand. Like when people see a developed Africa and Africans, they're like, huh? That should not be Africa. Africa is like disease, war, poverty, lions roaming the streets, jungles. And so there was sort of that, they were torn and they didn't know where they were. And we ended the conversation by agreeing that there's no monolithic way of being African. You can be an Egyptian and still an African. You can be an Ethiopian and an African. You can be from the DRC and you're an African, just that you have to define what being African means to you, right? It all went to bed and it was all happiness in La La Land until most recently, the Tunisian, the president came out to make irresponsible comments towards black people and towards fellow Africans. Why am I even saying black people? Towards fellow Africans. Now, the president said that, first of all, the influx of African immigrants in Tunisia is changing the dichotomy of the Tunisian community, and that very soon they will be more black than Arab. Guys, in 21st century, somebody thinks that, who am I even kidding? There's so much colorism, so much racism, influx of white supremacy, and the lighter you were and the more you can distance yourself from black people, the better, because we're always looking for somebody to oppress. And these remarks, when they were immediately made, they led to an influx of violence, because Tunisia is at a place where things are not going very great. The cost of living has gone high, and there's so much tension in the country, and the president gave the people, particularly racist people and criminals, an outlet to redirect their anger. And some of this was enabled by the comments that he made, that the rise of crime is perpetuated by the immigrants who've moved to their country. And we begin seeing violence towards Africans. This is violence against Africans perpetuated by fellow Africans, just because your skin is lighter than mine, and just because somebody has told you that we're here to cause insecurity and to interact with people. It caused a lot of rage. I don't want to say like the whole country is as racist as the president and colorist. They're black Tunisians. Let us not get it twisted. They're black Tunisians. And remember the conversations that we said, there's no monolithic way of being African. You can be light-skinned, Arab, and Tunisian. You can be dark-skinned and Tunisian. And so African countries are beginning to ask themselves, what is actually happening here? Now, let's put it into context a little bit. From everything that I've read and gathered, many of North African countries are far developed than Sub-Saharan country. If you look at statistics, any given statistics, you'll always see Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. They're far developed in terms of the income that people have in the country, the jobs that they have, infrastructure, education, development. For a long time, they enjoyed stability until most recently. That is a given. And so I don't know where the division came. Maybe it's because of the development, but when we talk about Africa, usually we talk about Sub-Saharan Africa, because North Africa is treated almost differently. And this is according to, like, go look at any data. They'll say Sub-Saharan Africa. North Africa, their data is always very different. And so because of that, and I think their proximity to Europe, and because of the texture of their skin and the genetics, they sort of lean and they're more inclined towards the Arab world, and also because many of them are Muslims. That is a given. You're allowed to decide who you are. Again, we've said there's no monolithic way of being African. You can be Sub-Saharan Africa or you can be North African. But when it gets to a place where some of these things are now being turned and used against people to perpetuate violence, then that's where we have a problem. Immigrants are now afraid of their Africans in an African country are fearing for their lives. They're Ghanaians, they're people from Cote d'Ivoire, they're people from Senegal there who are working. It's normal. They're Tunisians in Ghana, they're Tunisians in Kenya, they're Tunisians everywhere. Imagine if every African country was to start treating them like that. How would it be? These people are fearing for their lives. African countries are now being forced to send planes to take their people out because people are afraid. People can't leave their houses. People are afraid of being attacked because the president has told the country that the petty criminals and the criminal insurgencies that are going on in the country is as a result of people that look like this. In what world is this okay? Just tell me, in what world is this stuff okay? And you know, that is just part of the retaliation where African countries, it's not even retaliation, it's just African countries are choosing to take their people out, and we haven't seen any sort of consequence against Tunisia over these remarks and some of the actions that have happened there. Well, the African Union said, we'll call off a conference that was slated to be there. And then what again? Because we cannot, as a continent, continue to enable this kind of division. We can give you the space to exist as who you think you are, but for as long as you carry the African tag somewhere, you have to be African. You can't be African when it works for you. And when it doesn't work for you, then you don't want to be African. And let me just explain something. North Africa is also considered sort of like the gateway to Europe. Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, and stuff. Life on the continent is not generally easy, particularly for many young people. And it's true that there's some people, particularly young people, who will save up money, go to Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Algeria to work as they try to find a way to go to Europe. That is also very true, because it's considered the gateway to Europe, and people always think and perceive that if you can find your way to Europe, at least you'll get better opportunities and you can just give yourself a better life. When did it become a crime to pursue greener pastures? When did it become a crime to say, I want better for myself, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't bad things or bad people. There's certain Tunisians that are criminals. That is a given. Just the way maybe there's some of the Africans who live there that have resorted to crime and things like that. But you cannot just make a blanket statement condemning all Africans that live in your country. It's ridiculous when I say all Africans here, they're in an African country, because they're also Africans. And it just doesn't sound right for me to say black like what's even black Africans? Like, what do we mean? You know? And so I think that the African Union has to take a very firm stand against Tunisia. It's either like find them some monetary damages, take away some power from them if they hold some seats at the AU, take that power away from them. Blacklist them for maybe a year or two from attending your events. Ask their president to offer an apology and sort of compensation to anybody who's been hurt in the process. I want to see African countries, particularly African countries that have many of their people in Tunisia who were hurt, hold Tunisia to account and say, we will not trade with you, we will not do business with you, we are revoking some of the visas and passports of some of the people that live here. We want your embassy and its people to leave our country as soon as, like, retaliate. And I'm not saying in a violent way, I'm saying there are ways that governments can stand up for themselves and send a point across so that these things do not continue happening. If we allow Tunisia to get away with this, trust you me, it's only the beginning. And I'm telling you this for free. That colorism and racism thing is a real thing. It's no longer just a story that we hear. Content creators have been to many North African countries, and they're called monkeys, they're called chocolate, they were called all sorts of names to insinuate that their skin color is different from the skin color of the locals. There's evidence out there. Go on TikTok. Tayo Aina even did a story on the racism that he experienced. It even sounds ridiculous that an African like you is looking down upon you. It's ridiculous. The evidence is out there, and I think it's time that African countries stand up and call out Tunisia so that something like this never has to happen again. Because if they don't, it will happen again and again, and every time it happens, it will be more violent than the previous time it happened. Well, guys, I don't know what you think. You tell me what you think in the comment section. Do you think that it is right that an African country can decide that other Africans are criminals and they want them out of their country? Do you think it makes sense that an African country thinks that other Africans will make them way too black instead of Arab? And just, you know, no, our rage and our concern is not misplaced. We have every right to call this out. But you tell me where you come from. Have you experienced something like this where people who are lighter than you think they're better than you and they're looking for an avenue or people to oppress just because that's how the system is? White people look down upon the Chinese look down upon Arabs look down upon Africans are lighter, Africans will look down upon darker Africans will find another darker African to look down upon. Where's this world heading to? Anyway, enough of this musings. My name is Ndiro Ganga. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to connect with me, my official handles are at Ndiro Ganga on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you'd like to connect with me on YouTube, it's still at Ndiro Ganga, where I do stories on diaspora relocation to that continent. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.